Okay, today we're going over the Industrial Revolution, geographic factors, and technology of the revolution. Previously, we've looked at an overview of the Industrial Revolution that tells basically quickly the whole story, and we've gone more in depth in the agricultural revolution as a factor and a cause. This lesson focuses a little on the geography, the technology, and other factors. The curriculum states factors including new economic theories, we won't talk about that today, and practices, new sources of energy, yes, technological innovations, yes, influenced in development of new communications, yes, and transportation systems, yes, and new methods of production, yes. These developments had numerous effects. Students will analyze the factors and conditions needed to industrialize and to expand industrial production, as well as shifts in economic practices. Students will examine changes and innovations in energy, technology, and communication, and transportation that enabled industrialization. And in the future lessons, we'll go more in depth into events and conditions during the Industrial Revolution and the effects that came from the Industrial Revolution. So this is a little straightforward and a little difficult. Okay, it's entirely simplistic to examine the changes and innovations in energy, what new energy systems were used in the Industrial Revolution, what new technology, what new communication systems, and what new transportation. It's actually even really easy to understand the effects of these new energies and new communications, new technology. What's a little more in-depth, which is a little more interesting, they're both interesting, but what's interesting to explore is, what does successful industrialization need? And we could see that today because certain countries are very post-industrial and don't have a lot of factories. Like the United States is very post-industrial. The factories the United States has is very specialized and or protected by unions or the government. Most factories in the United States have left the country to go because it's cheaper in other places around the world. So the U.S. is pretty post-industrial. But many countries are agricultural and haven't gone through the Industrial Revolution. And I don't want to say reached the Industrial Revolution because sometimes they don't want to get to an industrial country. Okay, that is just a choice. But some countries want to become industrial, but they're missing factors. They don't have certain factors that would make it profitable or possible to industrialize. So it is interesting to go through and look at the dozen or so factors that have to come together in order for industrialization to happen. And I guess you could say, I forget what fallacy this is, you could say it was extraordinary that it happened in England. What are the chances that all these factors came together to start the industrialization in England? Well, I would say that that's, I forget the name of it, but that's a fallacy, because if England didn't have all these factors, there would be no industrialization. So literally the fact that it happened, it only happened because there were all those factors. So what are the chances? What are the chances? Well, it wouldn't have happened if they weren't there. So we wouldn't even be talking about industrialization if it didn't have already happened. So yes, it might be very coincidental, low probability that a place would have all these things, but we wouldn't even be having the conversation if it didn't already happen. So I don't really care what the percentage of England having all these factors at the right time, at the right place, with the right inventions. Very low probability, but it happened, and we're only talking about it because it did. And I think you'll see as we go through, a lot of these explanations of these factors are very logical, and they seem to make sense. You might not have come up with them all at once, but once you hear it, you're like, oh, well, that's kind of obvious. Yeah, it is. There's nothing really difficult to think about here. It's just the act of being exposed to it and then knowing, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious. Well, if it is obvious, just remember it and be able to tell the story in the future. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on here, and I thought instead of going slide by slide, it's best to put it all in one area, go through all of them very quickly, then go through a few in depth. So if our task is to say what was needed for industrialization to happen, well, we got to boil down exactly what the industrialization was at its core, because then we can decide what's needed for it. So the Industrial Revolution in England, so here's what it is. There's factories which have to be in cities. So you need cities where you need businesses to run the factories and purchase the equipment. Cities where businesses used powered machines. The Industrial Revolution needs powered machines to be different from everything else in this history. Cities where businesses used powered machines to mass produce and then distribute products. Okay, mass produces to produce a lot more than any time in history per person per energy used. But what we really get, cities, businesses, powered machines, mass producing things, and getting those things to customers. The example would be the textile industry with cloth. So everything around this definition is helping with something in this sentence, okay? So it's helping something in this sentence happen. Something in this box needs one of these factors to actually happen. So let's go through. Well, you need cities, and people in cities don't make food. So you need a surplus of food, and you need people, more people than ever before in the cities, and that's what the agricultural revolution, which we already studied, gave. A surplus of food and a lot of unemployed farmers going to the city to become workers. Okay, well, you need business, right? And these are large business, not family businesses, and there's a lot of moving parts. You need stability, okay? Because as these businesses grow, they are very susceptible to instability, whether it's the country fighting or whether it's people in the country where there's no law and order. So you need a stable and safe country to link all these, the resource chain and the distribution and the production, okay? And so what we get is Great Britain is an island. It is protected. And so although Great Britain was involved in Napoleonic Wars and other wars and the Revolution, the United States revolted, Great Britain, there wasn't war being fought on the soil. So wars were fought overseas, as they say, so very stable and very protected. And within the country, there was a strong rule of law. There was a law system, and the laws were enforced, and there wasn't unrest in the country, and so thus it was safe to have businesses, and your businesses wouldn't be destroyed, or they would be able to run nicely. Okay. For business also, you need a financial system, okay? These are big businesses. You need to take loans. You need to move a lot of money around. There's a lot of accounting. There's a lot of finance going on. And England had a banking system. It was used to big business. Their banks gave loans. They gave credit. There was a history of big business. It was all set up for these big businesses to do factory-type work. Okay, we're going to get to powered machines. And the new power of the Industrial Revolution is the steam engine, okay? Burning coal to create steam, and the steam creates rotational motion. And once you have motion coming from a burning source, it's not humans, it's not animals, that steam engine is now an energy source, okay? So getting a steam engine to work and creating those machines, we need a couple industries. Now, we need a fuel for the steam engine, and a lot of coal was used. So if we're going to get coal, we are going to have coal mining. So we are removing the coal from the ground. That coal then is used to power the steam engine. And by the way, a byproduct of the coal is a gas, which was a new form of energy too. So England, I do believe, was the first to use gas lighting in their streets, in the cities, and then later it came into the home. So there was a gas lighting which replaced candles and replaced oil lamps. And so during the Industrial Revolution, you had gas lighting inside. It wasn't until after the Industrial Revolution you had electric lighting in the home and electricity. So gas lighting was first. Okay, the steam engine and the other machines used in the Industrial Revolution needed to be made with iron and steel. So the whole industry had to grow up alongside of the coal industry, which is basically the steel industry. It had to ramp up 5, 10, 100, dozens of times bigger than before. And the way they did that is you have a whole iron mining industry where people will get iron from the ground, okay? They ship it to factories, and in the factories, that iron, the impurities can be removed, and it can be produced into steel, which is, for many, many, many uses, a wholly better form of iron for certain uses. Iron is still good for some uses, but steel is better for others. What can I say? It's done in a loud, fairly dangerous, pretty industrial factory, and there's something called the Bessemer process that made it so much more better at the time. Okay, you can look into that if you want. Let's just say England's steel, iron mining and steel production was top-notch, their coal mining was top-notch, and thus they had enough of the raw materials and industries to create machines. And the machines used in the Industrial Revolution, here's the biggies. The steam engine powered everything, okay? Each industry had specialized machines. You want to make spoons over and over and over. You had a machine powered by steam that would forge the spoons, okay? The biggie that we always talk, there's machines that pump water out of coal mines. There's tons of different machines. The ones we already talked about and always talk about are the ones that spin cotton into thread and the machines that weave the thread into cloth. Those are the most famous machines. Okay, two other machines that are unbelievably important is the railroad, a rail engine, a train, that's what I was going for, a steam train. That machine was unbelievably important, and a steam ship that goes over the ocean was unbelievably important. So these factories run by businesses in cities are now going to mass produce tons and tons and tons of cotton. So what do you got to do for that? Well, I mean, cloth, sorry. You need the raw materials. And if you're going to produce spoons and knives and forks, you're going to need the steel, blah, blah, blah. You need the raw materials. So let's go with the textile industry. So cotton is a huge raw material, and that is mostly, and if not mostly, let's say a lot from the United States at the time. And any of these graphs, any graph, any map during the Industrial Revolution, any part of these factors, you put it onto a graph, you put it onto a map, and you will see it explode and grow from the 1750s on. So if England was using, what, 10 tons per year of cotton into cloth in 1800, and by the end of the decade they were using 800 tons, I think I can do math. That's 80 times more cloth, cotton used as the Industrial Revolution went on. I mean, just think about it for a second, and this will show you the power of England's Industrial Revolution. They were doing about 10 tons of cotton for 16 million people in Great Britain. And then they started using 800 tons. That would mean they were making enough cloth for 1.3 billion people. So if 10 tons can be for 16 million, 800 tons can be for 1.3 billion, which is the population of the world in 1900. The world population in 1900 is like 1.6 billion. So when we call England the workshop of the world during the Industrial Revolution, that's because they're producing enough goods for all the world. Now, not all of the world bought English goods, okay? Not all, but a lot of the major population was buying industrial goods made in England and Europe. Why? Because clothes are so cheap. People didn't buy just one or two or three things. They loaded up on clothes. So it's not like everyone in the world bought English goods, but a lot of people did. And England had to import a lot of cotton from the U.S. Okay, so in order to mass produce, you need a lot of workers. All right, so during the Industrial Revolution, men, women, and children worked. And apparently there was enough jobs for all the men, a lot of the women, and a lot of the children in the cities. So there was definitely growing factories and cities that needed, it needed the whole population to work. And they can be divided into skilled laborers and unskilled. Skilled laborers got paid a little bit more. They were the first to form unions. They were more needed. Can't just fire a skilled laborer too easily. And unskilled, which were treated horribly. We'll talk about life for the unskilled laborer was really poor. And then once the products are produced, the products needed to be distributed, okay? And you also need people to buy the products. And so a factor, remember, all of these are factors needed for the Industrial Revolution to happen and grow as large as it did. There has to be what we call markets for the products. So the first markets were just people in Great Britain, people in Ireland, people in Wales, Scotland, England, okay? They were just the average person was buying all the new goods. But then, since Great Britain was the first, the rest of Europe would buy because they're very close. And then the Great Britain sold to their colonies. So wherever Great Britain took over, whichever countries Great Britain took over in new imperialism times, such as India, they would put the local cloth and local fork making businesses out of business and replace it with exported cloth from England. So, and then finally, even places England did not conquer, they still sold to. So truly England was a workshop for the world. So on both sides, on triple side, in order to get food to the cities, in order to get raw materials to the factories, and in order to get finished goods from the factories to the markets, you do need a heavily increased transportation system in the country. Well, horse and carriage and horse and wagon was not going to cut it. You have to carry tons and tons and tons of iron and coal and food. It's just not going to work. Horses can't do that. Okay. So the very first thing we got is canals. Canal being a man-made river. Okay. And yes, the horses could pull the really big barges, and the barges could pull tons if they were on a canal, on the water. And also the roads did get better, because certain barges on a canal, very slow. So certain things needed to get there faster, especially food that would spoil. And so the roads became much better, and they worked hand in hand, canals and roads. Well, pretty soon we do get the invention of the railroad. Now the railroad is going to be did they even call it an iron horse? They might have called it an iron workhorse. You got to check that out. But it's going to become one of the cheapest, most efficient. Even today, rail is one of the most energy efficient, cheapest way to send, might not be cheapest, most energy efficient way to send things and haul things. And so railroads dotted the lands, lined the lands. And once we get goods for export from Great Britain, cross the oceans now with steamships. Faster, more reliable, bigger than wind ships. A couple things that pop in. Let's put rivers for cities. We should have done them earlier. Okay. Rivers are very important for cities, right? As a water source, transportation, and waste. A lot of industrial waste was thrown into the water, which is very unfortunate because it was also a water source for people and animals in the cities. So you'll notice that all the cities had a ready supply of water with the rivers. And I can only imagine, I could spend 5 seconds to look it up. I'm just going to say it happened. You can spend 5 seconds to look it up. If people are using canals for transportation, of course they're connecting canals to rivers. Okay, that's just how you do it. You use the rivers where you can, and then you connect canals where there's no river, or you even widen or deepen the river where you have to. That's just how everyone did it back then, so I'm sure they did it. Now, I'm also going to say, and I can't tell you how, it's just, I know it's true. You figure out how all these cities linked together, all this new urban life, it needs communication between the cities. It needs faster than horse and letter. Okay, so what really helps is going to be the communication through new communication systems. Through the Industrial Revolution, we get the electric telegraph. Now, electricity was invented, Industrial Revolution. It didn't get into the houses. So it's not for personal use, electricity, but it is for the larger use, such as the telegraph. It sends an electrical signal over wires, and electricity and magnetism are the same thing. So a telegraph just activates a magnet, and it goes beep, 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 beep. It's something just taps, and you just learn something like Morse code. You learn a language of tapping and beeping, and you have got a telegraph. And, you know, railroads can haul a lot more mail, personal communications, personal packages, and they can do it faster than, let's say, carriages and horses. So we see communication goes more by, increases because of railroads also. And is this the time? It's probably the time of the first post office, the first European, British postal system. It's probably pretty close to that. You know, it might have started earlier. I seem to remember it starts earlier, but I'm sure it really, really exploded, especially now that you can more cheaply send packages across the country with railroads. I bet there was an explosion of the British Postal Service. And those are basically the factors, all the factors that Great Britain had, and they needed all of these to be able to have a successful industrial revolution. You know, that's the basics of what we got to know. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through each one, see if I have an interesting picture, or see if I have an interesting or a very important result of, or something just interesting that I know about it, or an important effect. All right, agricultural revolution, we have a whole lesson on, so I'm skipping that. The rule of law and safe and stable is really one of the things that makes economies and capitalism work in businesses. And you'll see capitalism failing in countries. And countries today want to industrialize, but they're not safe enough. There's too much internal conflict. So that's what I want to say about that. England, and yes, Wales and Scotland, and England is really just rife with rivers. I mean, you can take a look at right there, almost the whole country is connected through rivers, and I would love for someone to tell me. I assume that they are navigable. There's not a lot of waterfalls. I assume that these rivers are used as major transportations. And it's really interesting, by the way, when you look at that, the legend, England is not, Great Britain's not a huge place. I mean, England is only what? I mean, what Great Britain is, what are we talking about? 200 miles across, such like that. It is the size of some of the states in the United States. So let's say Great Britain wants to do railroads over the whole country. Pretty easy. No place is really very far from the ocean. So wherever your factories are, it's just like this to get it to the ocean. That gets it to the world. I mean, this is not a huge place. Okay, very accessible. The trip from the coal mine to the factory is not that far. So let me get you a little video of a steam engine working and actually working a factory, right? Okay, so this is going to be pretty close to how it was back then. All right, so you got a big boil to create the steam. You're going to shovel coal in. Now, if you're on something like the Titanic or one of the ships, you're going to have a boiler room. You're going to shovel coal into it. It's going to create the steam. If you're on a train, you're going to shovel coal into one of these things on a train. It's going to create the steam. So I guess that's a job, shoveling coal into it. Now, the steam engine makes the flywheel go or the wheel go. Okay, so there's pistons. So the pistons go back and forth. What it's doing is it's taking back and forth energy and turning it into rotating energy, all right? So the steam is going to make this part go back and forth, but this lever arm is going to turn it into rotational energy. Now, once you have a rotating wheel, this back and forth turns into rotation, and you can take the rotation and change, like that's what your car does. Your engine, it's just the same thing as a piston in your car. It's changing forward and back energy to rotation. That does something. The ball there going back and forth, I don't know what it is. There's a lot of moving parts to this steam engine. Yeah. Okay, so now we take rotational energy and we're rotating up here in the ceiling and we're connecting, these are bands. These are not cables, but they're leather strap cables. Yes, leather strap bands. And up top is rotating. And then we just take the strap and it makes the machine rotate down there. You're taking the rotation from up top through a strap, and you're doing it there. And then once you have rotation here on your machine, you can turn it into back and forth motion once again. So it's kind of like you use the rotating motion to transfer it, and then when you get back to your machine, you can go into the back and forth, and you can see you can just get the whole room, hundreds of them going. And it's cool because one of them could be stopped, but the others could be going because the rotating ceiling, the pipes on the ceiling that are rotating, the spindles, they just keep rotating over and over. You can stop any individual machine. So if you ever wondered, that's how the factories work. So I can't do a video of the telegraph. I love physics. I love electricity, but even I can't sit through one of these. It's just this. It's too boring for me. Okay? There's electricity. You press it down. There's magnets. It goes beep. Beep, 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 beep. Morse code. You turn the beeps into words. You write it down. You send the telegram. You can look it up if you want. Talking about railroads, this is the first steam engine railroad. It's a proof of concept. You see the same thing. We just got one of those steam engines which turns back and forth motion into moving wheels, and it's got some tracks. And this is obviously just for one person, just to prove that it could work. And then they're able to make actual steam trains. And believe it or not, trains in the Industrial Revolution look a lot like trains you would see, cargo trains today, so we don't need to see that. I'm going to show, check this out, by 1870, I do believe, you can check out the amount of railroads in Europe. Now remember, Europe is not very big. This is one of the United States, and these are, this might be Texas or something. So, I mean, the size of Western Europe isn't that big. So, I mean, obviously it's still an amazing feat, an amazing investment in infrastructure to make all these railways, but it's not as amazing as if it was like all of Russia or something, okay? But still, you could see how railways are just all over Great Britain, and of course for France too, and Spain. Now, check this out. This could be a symbol of industrialization. Which countries were industrialized in 1870? Certainly not Portugal, no railways. Not really Spain, so not too much there. Not a lot in southern Italy, okay? But we can definitely see that Germany, France, the UK, totally industrialized, because why else would you have railroads? Obviously to transport people, but you need industry to pay. Happened in the United States too. Look at that, 50 years, we get just a couple railroads. And there was a civil war in the middle of this too. So they went from this amount of railroads to all of this railroads in 50 years with a civil war right in the middle. So you could see that the Industrial Revolution explodes railroads and transportation. Let me talk a little bit about railroads as important for transportation as a little aside. Railroads are the first time a middle-class, non-rich people can actually move around a country for cheap. Otherwise, it's horse and carriages, which cost quite a bit of money, okay? So now, the middle class with some money can move anywhere and can vacation anywhere in the country by just buying a fairly inexpensive railway ticket. It really opens up this idea of mobility for a lot of the citizens of a country instead of just the wealthy. Think of that. How do you, if you don't have money, how do you move around a country? You literally don't, because it takes a very expensive horse. But now you've got the railroads. So it's the brand new world of actual people transportation. And this happens with the steamship too. The whole migrations, the whole second and third wave of immigration into the United States, the biggest waves of immigration come from hundreds and thousands of people on steamships, because the steamships now could safely and quickly move middle-class people and low-class people. Poor people could save up enough money for a ticket to now migrate around the world from Ireland to the United States. I'm just thinking of one of the mass migrations. So this idea that non-rich people can move is a huge step forward in human geography. And this is one of the very first times in history that it actually happens. And we haven't looked back since. Now, the default is people are movable and mobile. Industrial Revolution steel mill, I guess it's a picture. Not sure how accurate it is. We'll get to coal mining in working conditions. Basically, Industrial Revolution coal mining included children, included adult men, included women. It's just inhuman. It was just inhuman. And horrible coal mining conditions persisted past 1920s and into the 1930s, I think. And I think that's all I want to say about the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution and factors that led to its growth. All right, thanks for watching.